we will seem a lot more interesting. And hopefully you won't realize how much we're slurring as when it goes on.
Yeah, so I'm a designer and Matt is a developer, and we work daily together collaborating. And one thing we collaborate on a lot at eRoy is email. So we both feel rather passionately about it, and we're really excited to talk about it.
Yeah, email is kind of in our name, started email ROI. So our design, development, and strategy, content, accounts, everyone all works together. And we produce a lot of great emails. And over the 12-year history of this company, it's gone from what emails looked like in 2003 to kind of what they look like now, and hopefully pushing the envelope a little bit further to see what it's going to look like. And so that's what we're going to kind of talk about today.
Yeah, and we encourage people to interrupt us with any questions. We kind of want it to be a dialogue. If you do want to say anything or have any sort of feedback as we go through, feel free to heckle us or point out what we're wrong. Throw produce?
Yeah.
Tomatoes. Cool. So the email, the history of email really is simple. Email itself is simple. It's a solution to really solve a simple problem. And from those sort of beginnings, it's really sort of revolutionized the way we communicate with each other. It's Monday. Think about all the email you probably read just today and sent. It's probably a lot. And you probably didn't stop to think about where it came from or where it's going. That's okay, because we're going to walk you through the history. We're going to start at the beginning, we're going to move through to the future, and along the way we're going to look at how marketers have taken it and used it for good, use it towards evil. But regardless of how it's kind of used, it at its core is just about the message. It's really about communication.
So the challenge for email is how to deliver that message. In the beginning days of the internet with ARPANET, each programmer was typically connected to a terminal with a phone line. And other than writing notes or talking to each other, there wasn't a real good way to communicate simple messages across the network. There'd be research labs in UCLA and in Washington, D.C. and in Virginia. But there was no, I mean, email obviously didn't exist yet, so there wasn't a way to get that message across.
What timeline is this?
Oh, sorry. This is around the 1970s when the Department of Defense funded research ARPANET. What was created to the birthplace of the internet. So they hired BBN Technologies to help them build up this software and this idea. And a little bit of algorithm. So the solution of this problem with programmers unable to talk to each other in a real easy way across the network, there was a programmer for BBN named Ray Tomlinson, and he worked with a software called SendMessage, which could send a message from a user to another user as long as they were on that same computer. The computers were timeshares, so Alan would send a message to Ray, basically like a little digital post-it note. And then there was another program that would send messages across the network, but it couldn't send to a user and a computer at the same time. So Ray Tomlinson, on his own time, decided that if he merged these two ideas, that it would be really useful for programmers to talk to each other by Ray sending a message to John on another network on another computer. So we got to plug the sound in.
We totally rehearsed this.
Oh, it was the music. Okay.
One of the most popular applications on the internet was a program Tomlinson wrote on his own time.
It seemed like a neat idea. Nobody was clamoring for email, and there was nobody. Our sponsor from the defense didn't say anything about wanting email. My boss didn't say anything about email. But in fact, nobody said anything about email because the term wasn't coined until several years later. But it just seemed like an interesting thing to do with a computer and a network, and so I just did it.
So then electronic mail became the completely unanticipated killer app, as we say, for the ARPANET. We went from remote login, file transfer, electronic mail in a year flat or 2 years flat. And then it stayed that way for 20 years.
Yes.
So one of the things that I really love about that clip is the idea of innovation. Nobody told Ray that creating email would be so revolutionary for communication. He just was like, hey, there's a problem and I should probably solve it. And I think as like designers or developers, as people who create things that sort of go out into the universe, we should all take responsibility for our own neat ideas and our own onus for creating things. And if we see a problem, we should probably just create a solution, just like Ray did.
We want to talk a little bit about how the @ sign evolved from email. We've got this little guy, this little prop. I actually already had this because my name is Matt. So of course I did something stupid and got a letter M like that. And that's on my desk usually. So that's how you know whose desk that is. So the chief problem with email was the user. Separating the user and the computer, but merging those two so that you knew when you wanted to send a message across the network who that was going to. And so he wanted to use a special character so that the computer could easily parse the message and then separate user and computer in a way that kind of made sense that was human readable. So he talked about, or he thought about using a few different keys. I have a few little notes here that I'm going to read because I'm going to forget them all. Medieval monks use the @ sign as an abbreviation when copying manuscripts. Merchants have used it to signify at the rate of, so like 5 apples at 129 or something like that. And then with the Industrial Revolution, @ was used in bookkeeping, but I'm not quite sure what for. But we read it on the internet, so it must have been true, and so we put it on there. Ray chose the @ sign because it needed an individual's name as well as the name of the computer. So the symbol separates those two computers. His eyes fell on the @ sign poised above P on his Model 33 teletype. He was looking for a symbol that wasn't used too much in computers, so underscores and dots and all those things were kind of already taken by other things that computers used. He also had this little quote about it, probably saved it from going the way of the cent sign on computer keyboards, which you don't really find on computers. You'll find the dollar sign, but not so much the cent sign. And then when he merged those two programs, the send message and the other one that I can't remember the name of, he would send it from one computer in his room through ARPANET and then back to the other computer, which was like right next to. So he would send like QWERTY IUOP @ sign or something, go through the ARPANET, come back from the other computer. And then the other nice thing about the @ sign is that it's the only preposition on the keyboard. So he's probably found some grammar humor in that as well.
Nerd stuff. So the implementation of email was pretty great. It sort of connected people, and you can see the sort of societal implications starting in the 80s. And I have another video for you. It's good. All right.
this happened with text messages, it would be so creepy. So that's one of the first scenes in movie history that's kind of like email, but also probably the first thing that looks like Tinder in an email. We've got one more video for you too, a little bit later.
So moving on to the 90s, we have Tom and Meg and You've Got Mail. This is sort of the AOL era.
Even now, like, I can't figure it out.
Wouldn't it be wonderful if I could pass all my zingers to you, and then I would never behave badly, and you could behave badly all the time, and we'd both be happy? But then, on the other hand, I must warn you that when you finally have the pleasure of saying the thing you mean to say at the moment you mean to say it, remorse inevitably follows. Do you think we should meet?
Does anybody still have their AOL address? My grandma also has it.
Does anybody have a good example of early use that they used email for, a good story about email, like back in the day?
Or your first memory of how email was great or terrible?
The sounds that AOL made when you're trying to hook up to it. That'll always be
Yeah.
my brain.
Sure.
I remember hearing about Hotmail in middle school and looking up Hot Mail.
Well, did you find it?
I don't know if you're going to talk about Pine, that program at all, but when I worked at Multnomah County Library, as late as 2001, they were using Pine as their,
That's old school.
Yeah, I still use Pine occasionally.
Can you tell the crowd and me what Pine is?
I have no idea.
It's an email client, email reader.
Okay. One of the first ones, or just one of the work?
It's one of the first user interface kind of things. It wasn't just on the command line.
Okay.
Sure.
Oh, sorry, we're going to go to mine. So one of my first memories of email was, I think I went to bored.com because one day I was bored. And that's how I actually found out about email. And I signed up through Hotbot or Excite or something. And all I got was crap from what ended up being spam. So then when Gmail came around, I got a Gmail address that I only gave out to friends. Then I had a Gmail address that I only gave out to family. Then I had a Gmail address that I would use to sign up for accounts for other sites, so that when I would get their newsletters, I would just ignore them because I only used my fake email address, like mattfake@gmail.com or something like that. And then eventually when the spam laws started getting a little better and you could opt out, eventually I kind of merged all my emails into one, which didn't even happen until about 5-6 years ago. But now I'm going to go to the next slide and Nicole talk a little bit about hers.
So the earliest email that I could find was from 1998. And what's important about this email is it happened at a pivotal moment in my growing up. This summer, we moved from a town outside of Portland, Forest Grove. Some of you might be familiar with it. Most of you aren't. But we moved from that small town to the East Coast to Delaware. And at that point in time, it was really expensive to call long distance. So the only way I had to really communicate with any of my friends was America Online. And only one of my friends had a computer, my best friend Tanya. And so I'd sit there and wait for her to get on the computer so we could talk. And that never happened with the time zone. And so we would send these emails back and forth. And this one in particular, I had printed it out and put it in this journal that I kept that documents this whole move. I was really emo. I pasted pictures of Robert Smith from The Cure in there. And if you can see that far away, my AOL screen name is Delaware. Like, where am I? So this particular message was so important to me, and I was sentimental and lonely at the time that I printed it and put it in the journal. And yeah, and that was the only way I had to communicate. And so it was really important to me at 15.
I think a lot of our first uses of emails was just to send messages to friends, and for those of us who hated talking on the phone, this was the perfect way to send a message like, yes, Grandma, I will be there for Thanksgiving, or things of that nature. And then over the last few years, the email message has evolved, and internet has evolved with it. So get ready for a segue. We're going to talk a little bit about the godfathers of the internet and how they evolved internet from ARPANET in the 1970s to when everybody kind of got internet in the 90s, early 2000s. So we talked a little bit about Ray Tomlinson. He was a programmer with BBN who worked with ARPANET, developed email, had a cool video that we just saw earlier, has a nice beard. Vint Cerf, I hope I'm pronouncing his name right. I couldn't find out how to pronounce that online. He led the engineering of one of the very first, or the very first commercial email messaging systems called MCI Mail. So in the 90s, that was one of the first email companies that you could actually sign up and have a interface to read your mail in. He also co-designed the TCP IP protocol, which is what we're still using today for the internet. Vice President and Chief Internet Evangelist for Google. One of the coolest job titles, I think, at Google. The next guy is Leonard Kleinrock, and he developed the math behind the internet. He basically developed the early ideas of the queuing theory, the order that messages are received and processed, and then developed packet routing, and that's basically how the internet came about. The internet was actually figuratively, but I would say figuratively born in his lab in UCLA. Was the first time that they were able to send packets over a network. Sir Tim Berners-Lee, I think might be a name that's a little bit more familiar. He implemented and developed the first HTTP transfer of information, founded the W3C. Since he is a sir, he's literally an internet knight. I don't think there's a whole lot of them, and I want to be one. John Postel also worked at BBN Tech with Ray Tomlinson. He called the use of the @ sign to separate user and computer a nice hack. Despite what a lot of awesome movies, I want to say, make hacking out to be, it's usually what hacking is. It's just using something in a way it's not supposed to be used, but that gets something done, and it's easier than doing it the right way. And he was right. The @ sign was a nice hack. And actually the way we still use email is a little bit hacky. So I want to jump into now coding like it's 1999. What this means. When HTML and CSS was starting to be used for developing web pages, we use table-based layout. Right now, tables are very few. Don't want to use tables for building your web pages. You'll be frowned upon. But in the 90s, that's what everyone did. Everyone made tables and grids and frames. Just box up all your content and put this box here, and this box over there. But with the W3C, the internet evolved. We started to get some standards in the internet. Started to use better ideas, better ways of organizing information. Browsers caught on, like Firefox and Chrome, and eventually, like last year, Internet Explorer finally caught on. But what's sad is that email clients didn't really catch on. Hotmail and Outlook, even Gmail, didn't really adopt any of these standards. So when we get emails, we're still getting table-based layout emails because the email clients just won't render an HTML email the way it would a web page.
So So the evolution, as email sort of evolves, it goes from
She wrote really small so that she wouldn't have to use a lot of post-it notes.
So here we go. In the 90s, we sort of went through this evolution where it went from the novelty of sort of being able to email personal emails from your mom to yourself or whatever, and it really got picked up by marketers. So marketers found this to be a cost-effective, easy way to reach consumers. And so that led really to the pay and spray sort of mentality, where they could just blast out an email and hit a bunch of people. This led to spam. And whether it's get a gift card or pharmaceuticals, I like this one, it was pretty sexy. It really just created this battlefield between the sender, these spammers, and the receiver, which is you and I. So it was created kind of a hostile environment and created a really bad rap for email.
Do these types of emails work for anybody? Or, no? It's fine, not me.
So in 2003, the CAN spam law was passed, and that really put some regulations involved in marketing permissions and really sort of ushered in the new age of email. Marketers realized that they can't just, pay and spray. For people to really open their email and look at it and read it, they really had to be strategic about what they were sending and who they were sending it to.
And the CAN Spam Act didn't really work that well. There were a lot of things that they left out of the bill that kind of encouraged marketers to send the spam. Like you didn't have to have an opt-out right away, and you didn't have to have permission from the user to send your message to. I just want to point out the fun fact that CAN Spam stands for Controlled Assault of Non-Solicited Pornography and Marketing. So when you hear that you get spam, the P stands for pornography. So you're saying that every time you say spam.
So with these new regulations and laws, in 2010, it really sort of, again, ushered in this new age in email marketing, where people, they wanted quality, not quantity. So it's a return to the message, and it's a return to strategy. Using things like user-based actions to send emails, so whether that's a welcome series or based off of a user's users on a website, really targeting that messaging to the actual person that it's being sent to. So that leads us to today. Email is one of the most widely used applications of the internet, which is kind of crazy if you think about the breadth of the internet. There's over 3 billion email addresses. That's a lot. And on average, a person gets 416 commercial emails. And 51% of those are open on mobile devices.
Yeah, so in 2013, the mobile opens on email finally passed desktop. It started to climb in 2010 with the first iPhone and all of its competitors, where you can use the internet on your device, and one of the first things you would do on the internet is check your mail. So it only took 3 years for it to undo most of the work that all of the desktop clients have done. So iPhones, iPads, Android devices, Kindles, Blackberries, more emails are open on those than on desktop. And so they also approach standards a little bit differently than your Hotlooks and your Yahoos, the way they open mail. But we still have to code in tables because of those clients that aren't adopting to the new standards. So as designers, as developers, as marketers, you still have a message to send, but you want to make that message a little bit pretty. And since you can't send them a web page, you have to send them what most people will be able to open. But if you can send a few other bells and whistles, and that's kind of cool too.
So this, actually, let me, I have an example. So this is an example of a forward-thinking email that you would get today. It uses CSS for ESPs that acknowledge CSS. It's got a modern layout, meaning it's not that boxed newsletter type layout. It's also responsive, so it uses fluid grids, fluid images, and also media queries to adjust to the viewport. It also is optimized for Retina display, so it serves up images that are twice as large for the high density image monitors. And if you think of all of that as like a delicious email cake, on top of that, the icing is they use drop shadows, hover states, and font base to deliver an even better experience for providers that show that.
Yeah, so about 4 years ago, we're stuck with just an kind of what you would see now is kind of an ugly table, just rows and grids and just text. And so a lot of people would just use images as their whole email because it was easier than actually coding an email, considering all the limitations you had with the things you were and weren't able to do. But now we can target specific devices, and whatever they have, we can cater to that. But if they have something like Lotus Notes, well then, okay, you can solve these text and images too. Yeah, okay. So we talked a little bit about dynamic content in the last slide. And we want to think about where email was going. So the more that email clients are starting to adopt some of the standards, Apple Mail is now starting to support background images and background videos. This might not sound that great to some of you, but there are some email clients that can actually play audio. So if you open an email, you might just get blasted with music. It'll be like opening a MySpace page again. Right now, there's only like 6 or 7 or so fonts that are you can actually use in email. But some clients allow us to choose different fonts by using font libraries, and so we can actually cater our typography and messaging that way. This is an example of an email by Litmus. Has anyone heard of Litmus? Litmus is awesome. We wanted to go to the Design conference, but it turns out it's in Massachusetts. So what this email has, this is a background video, but for email clients that doesn't have a video, it falls back to a GIF or a background color, which is kind of that burnt sienna. So whatever it supports, that's what it'll show. That little rotating Litmus thing is a CSS transformation, but for email clients that don't support that, that just falls back to a GIF as well.
So what I think what is important to note about using these sort of forward-thinking icing is that you want to plan for the baseline. Well, first you want to consider your audience. If you know that you're sending an email to like a creative group, you know they're going to be using their iPhones or they're going to be viewing it in a way that they're going to be able to see a video in the background. But so you build it for your best case scenario, and then you fall back to what the best possible viewing situation is for that particular person.
Yeah. So even though Litmus has some bells and whistles in this email, they still have the most important thing, the message. They have a design conference. When is it? Where is it? How do I get there? Cool. And then secondary message, what's happening at this event. So you're still getting the information. You almost kind of ignore all of the other stuff because you just see it as, oh, here's something cool that Litmus is doing. I want to see if I can try to go to that. And so now we're looking at what emails might look like in the future. So anyone have an Apple Watch yet? Maybe you know a guy that knows a guy that knows a guy. So right now, the Apple Watch will let you see email. We're not quite sure what it's really going to look like yet. You can kind of see, you get a subject line. I know it's hard for some of you back there, but you get that other TV. You get like a subject line, you get a pre-header. We're not really actually sure yet what happens when you open that, but it's probably safe to assume you're not going to see images. You're not going to see videos or music playing. So it's so important that you still get that message of whatever your email is. So those Viagra examples and those hot sales probably are not going to work for someone that's viewing that message on their watch. And then what is email on Google Glass or weird devices in the future going to look like? But what is constant with all of those things, bringing this all the way back to the beginning of email, is you're just sending a message from media. And so what is in that message is really important. And if you can add some bells and whistles, that's great. But you can't get too caught up in the things that email allows you to do.
So the second really important thing I think about the future of email design is the idea of modular email. And it's kind of a modern take on the classic newsletter email style. With sort of one-off emails, you can get really targeted, but you can't get a whole lot of flexibility with design and development. You sort of just building them one at a time. With this approach, you get to create a design system and a modular, reusable framework. So let's say, for example, you have a cooking newsletter, and you're segmenting your list based off of your preference: vegan, paleo, carnivore. What else is vegan? So let's say a person shows interest in vegan and vegetarian. You can send them this email, develop the content, develop the design, but you could target it based to that vegetarian, vegan, and just show them that content. Change the hierarchy and be able to reuse that email for another send. So it's really taking the mindset of how we currently develop and design websites and applying it to email, which I think takes email to a whole nother level. So with that, kind of brings us to the conclusion of our presentation. Email, again, it's just a simple solution, and at its core, it really is just about the message. It always has, and it always will. As far into the future as we can see, I think email will always be just a really pure form of marketing and communication. And so I wanted to, at the end, show you guys another video because they're fun. And I wanted to show you guys a video of Ray's induction into the Internet Hall of Fame, where he's talking about how he knew, at what point in time he knew he had made something really great.
There's a lot of.
Sorry, we had the play saved, and I think it played in the background by itself.
I knew this was going to happen to me. That's why I made notes.
That happened to me just a second ago.
Oh, I did that, yeah. Well, anyway, what I wanted to say was I actually found out what I had done in about 1996. That was the year, that was a couple of years after the 25th anniversary of the ARPANET, when there was a get-together and there was a lot of press coverage, and the early days of the ARPANET came to light. And as a result of that, I started getting calls from reporters and other people who had interest in publishing something or other. And one of those people was a reference librarian from the National Institute of Standards and Technology, good old NIST in the US. And she was putting together a newsletter. She did a monthly newsletter for the people she served in her group. And she wanted to ask me questions about email. She'd heard about that and she wanted some of the details. So I communicated with her by email, of course. And I answered her questions and she asked a few more questions. And that was kind of the end of it, and went on. And I continued working on my job. At that point, I was pretty much not working on the understory of the internet. I was up there. I was a user. I was one of the people who complains all the time. And about 6 months after I had that exchange with her, I got this email The subject was thank you, thank you, thank you. That's when I knew what the internet was about, because she was thanking me for having established a way in which she could communicate with other individuals who shared a problem she had. She had a relative who was ill with an illness that fairly rare and not a lot of people knew about it, but she found this group, email discussion group, where they could exchange information. So that's what I did. Thank you.
That's it. Thank you.
So you definitely want to open it up to any questions about anything email related or any comments, any heckling. You can throw your tomatoes at us now.
So this modular email concept, when do you suppose that's going to be available to masses? Is it now?
It is now. I think you have to have a really good development team to sort of pull it off. It's hard. Email's hard. So to add that layer of complexity onto email, as far as building a modular framework.
So it's not available to the masses, to end users.
Well, the idea is something we can implement today. You have a strong enough team or team that can actually execute that. It's not something that we're waiting for Outlook or Hotmail to be able to provide. It's just a different way of thinking about how to organize the HTML content of a web page or an email, so that if you wanted to just swap out some image or some text, then you can just swap that out and maybe reorder the order of the modules. So that that animated GIF that we saw a little bit ago, those are just really just 4 pieces of content that that HTML is used to build that up. So you just kind of move the HTML from up here to down here, and move one up here to up there, and so that would, and you can also dynamically produce that with whatever email service provider you have, your exact targets or Blue Hornet or Cheetah Mail or Marketo. The HTML would still be there. It's how you decide what and in what order and when you would show something. It's not unlike how dynamic content, depending on what information you have about your users. Does that help answer it a little bit?
No, I'm actually asking from a point of view of an actual lay person. I'm not a graphic designer. I'm not in the field of web design. I'm wondering, when is Apple going to introduce something to the masses?
I mean,
Like
so
that.
basically like a Constant Contact or MailChimp have simplified templates.
Right.
And if it's 3, 4, 5 years away where they allow it easier for a user to interact with a more complex template, that is how it would be made available to the masses.
Well, I mean, even just to have a background image. I mean, can you do that anyway now on any email standard client? Not talking about newsletter, because I have an MI account. I know what you're talking about. I rarely use it. I'm wondering, like, when this concept of visual imagery within an email is going to be available to the standard Joe to send an email to a friend, not just a newsletter.
I mean, I think it's probably dependent on companies like Emma or Constant Contact of when they want to provide those things. And so I think it might be up to them to see when they think it's going in that direction, or if they see that as a service to offer. Otherwise, it's possible just through, coding the email. But as far as like when we'll ever provide it, or when we'll
Gmail.
Yeah.
Yeah. When will you be able to send a personal email with a background image?
I see.
I would say that it's going the opposite direction. Gmail, Outlook, all of that are trying to strip everything out to get as bare bones as possible. So the email client side is going the opposite direction. It's really the other side, Exact Target, Emma, MailChimp, all that would provide that more visually rich experience.
If you are familiar with HTML, CSS coding, and voting in websites that never wanted to,
I would look into all the email service providers, not service providers, but companies like ExactTarget, MailChimp, Constant Contact. They all have documentation and, well, maybe not Constant Contact, but MailChimp has excellent guides and tutorials, as well as ExactTarget. You can join those communities, and they have a lot of resources as far as design, development, especially within, I don't know what platform you're using, but within their own platform, they have a lot of information.
And also Campaign Monitor, Litmus, and Email on Acid are, Litmus and Email on Acid companies.
Campaign Monitor.
Oh, sorry, Campaign Monitor. They do a lot of good research on email stats. Litmus and Email on Acid are two companies that provide email rendering services. So a few years ago, we would just have a Yahoo, an AOL, a Hotmail account, and we would log into all of those accounts and see what our emails look like. Litmus and Email on Acid lets you send an email to them, and then they will show you what it looks like on every email client and on every device. And they have a lot of great blogs and a lot of great resources on troubleshooting types of email problems you get when you're trying to send a two-month email, as well as stats. That's how we found the stat that mobile email past desktop opens. Litmus, put tracking into like 7 million of the emails that got sent through them to see what was happening and how people were opening and interacting with emails. Visual Studio Microsoft?
Yes.
I don't think so.
I would also check out Zurb, Z-U-R-B. They have some responsive templates and resources that are pretty good. So if you're approaching it from, I've coded website, now I'm going to code email, they're a really good resource.
And then hit URL up on Twitter if you have any other questions.
Yeah.
if you want actual links, we can help you out there too. I thought I saw him. Yeah.
What are you guys' thoughts on our brand using CC as to, like Square Cache uses CC as a function, or like follow-up.cc, base your CC email to provide another function of email? Are there any other services you've heard of, or brands doing with that you might know?
I'm actually not too familiar with that.
Well, like Square Cache, you can send money over email just by emailing a person and then CCing Square Cache, and then whatever the price is in the subject line, it'll connect you and just connect your debit card next to the email with Venmo. And then follow-up to CC is like, if I get an email or I want to remind myself to check it in a week, I email CC 1 week at follow-up.cc.
And then they'll send you back your email.
It's like,
send you back your reminder.
Yeah, so it's like a.
So that's a lot better than saying, hey Matt, don't forget about this. Read this email in a week.
Exactly.
No, that's new to us. I've heard a little bit about, I think, sending cash through email. I haven't really followed up on it so much. So no initial thoughts. What do you think?
I think there are a ton of products that are like taking email and using it as more of a functional service beyond communication. Like a tool of, sending cash is the biggest one.
So do they send cash to buy things, or is it just like sending it to your?
Like if I owe you $5 for a burrito, I would email your email address and CC Square Cache, and then it would ask me to connect my bank account, and then you would just get an email that said, I sent you money, and you accepted your bank account.
It's kind of interesting they use email instead of just making it either an app, because I know Twitter does that with a few different things.
I wonder how comfortable people feel about emailing money.
Scares me a little bit.
Yeah.
It's really
But I mean,
easy to spoof email.
I was also scared to buy things online, and then a year later, I'm buying almost everything.
So we are talking about CC and the functionality of using CC, using email as a tool versus just a messaging platform.
Yeah.
With different services, and then we said sending money over email might be scary, but I don't know.
2 years from now, we'll be fine.
Yeah. Any other questions?
I have a question just about spam, and what are some key things that you have to do to avoid, what are the things that you have to avoid as a brand to not have your emails marked as spam?
I think the number one thing is having a good text to image ratio. I feel like with marketing emails now, the trend is to just have images, because it's way easier to make an email with just images. It's much more difficult to code it and then have web text in that. And that's going to be your first sort of line of defense.
I would have a few things to say, but I would like to invite Tyler Holmes up to answer that question. He's our director of performance, and he is our unanimous expert on anything related to that.
Can you repeat the question, please?
Sure. So the question is, what are some things that you can do to make sure that you're not getting into the spam box? That everybody got that? Okay.
I think you have to hold that one.
Hold this really close. Okay. Well, so the unanimous response is it's kind of a black box. Emails are going to get lost. You're going to get into the spam box. No one is perfect. What Nicole said is correct about image to text ratio. The ESPs are really getting really smart about tracking people beyond just an IP address. So if everybody, when you send an email, whether it be from an email service provider like ExactTarget or something like that, you're sending from a specific IP address. Or if you're sending out of, if you're hosted at GoDaddy or whatever, you send out of an IP address, and that's how people can track that. They're getting really smart about tracking it from not just IP, but domain. And they're also looking at engagement within the email. So if it's clicks, if it's opens, if it's not opening, if it's sending it to your spam address, there's a lot of things that they're looking at beyond just free iPad. Right?
So if you have a legit IP address, then you're not going to be putting spam. Am I getting that right?
So, okay, so there's a couple ways you can do it. Also, you can be on a shared IP address. So people who are really big senders are going to be on a private IP, so they control their own destiny. Yeah. When you're on a shared IP, which a lot of smaller people are, you're also at the behest of everyone else who's on that IP. So if you have someone on there that's sending payday loans or talking about porn, so you kind of have you have some issues there. So you can't control everything unless you're on your own private domain, which of course costs more money.
And this is my last question. Sorry. So if your email or subscription letter or whatever goes into someone's spam box, how can you know as a brand that it went into people's spam folder? So you can iterate on top of that.
So the answer to that is always you got to pay more money. Oh, to repeat that, how do you know whether you're getting into the spam box? A couple ways. One, someone tells you. Another way is you can pay a company like ReturnPath that actually has deals with some of the ESPs, the major ESPs, they add some tracking onto that and they can tell you where it's going. We've had a couple clients that have gone through that process. It's kind of a major process to get onto that, and they actually have sort of a red carpet program that costs, I think it's upwards of $10,000 to $25,000. You go through a long process to basically prove that you are a okay email sender, and they kind of roll out the red carpet for those people. So it's a good thing if email is a huge driver of revenue for you, and if you're not getting in the inbox, you're not making money. But beyond that, setting up a whole bunch of email addresses to see what's happening. And then anytime that you do get into spam, move it over to your inbox, send some good vibes to some of the email providers. So.
Yeah, I would just quickly add to that there's, and this is probably common knowledge to everybody in here, but at the end of the day, it's really rudimentary and really basic. Yeah.
Very likely common knowledge, and well known within this like-minded crowd, but at the same time, still highly relevant and important, is just avoiding basic spam trigger words, avoiding having free in all caps in your subject line, avoiding having exclamation points at all in your subject line. The basic content within your email, there are particular words and sequences of words and phrases that ESPs would be looking for, and so on, that would flag your email as spam, and that would trigger it to go into somebody's spam folder as opposed to their inbox. Like basic common sense, you know what I mean? As a marketer, avoid sounding like a blatant marketer, especially a spammer.
You guys teach your clients
To send free iPads?
nude iPads.
Yeah.
Nude, naked free iPads.
Okay, we got another question in the middle.
Question. This might not be realm, but I was just wondering, you guys are talking about consumer emails and advertising, but how about corporate email? Is there any type of redesign that you are working on, or is there any ideas on that?
So the question is, examples of corporate email and how to market that message?
Not market the message, but just the fact that like redesigning it in certain ways to make it more efficient for people within large companies or even just small startups to communicate a little bit faster through email.
So do you mean like large corporations marketing with each other, or I'm sorry, sending emails to each other? Yeah, internally.
So a lot of times we get asked, you know, how it seems like there's this vast difference between business to consumer emails like Nike and all that, and then business to business where it's like super, say if you're selling deep tech servers to the CTO, and I mean basically it comes down to like the point of the presentation where they're still a person and it's mapping what that sales process is like, and then serving up the message that's going to resonate over the life cycle. The life cycle of selling a server might be 18 months versus like 18 hours to sell a pair of sneakers. So it's mapping that out and then mapping that through email. And it's also, I think one trend in business to business emailing is more of a marketing automation tools. So that is basically a more holistic kind of closed loop system between people that come onto their websites, and you have all kinds of information on them, and so you can trigger messages that are super relevant really quickly in the business to business. It tends to be a more expensive process for that software, but it produce like the value of that customer might be like $500,000, so it's worth it. But I don't like startup is a whole other question, and that I think there's a lot of like best practices you can use as a startup that they talk to, whether it's through MailChimp or Campaign Monitor or our blog or others that we have, Litmus and things like that, that there's just a lot of best practices that you can follow on that front.
Yeah, so I'm just going to give the microphone to whoever that works here that I think will give the best answer. So you might not just get it from me. You and then Robin.
You guys do anything at all about list development, or do you figure when somebody gets to your level, they've already got a list?
No.
Yeah, well, we do sometimes, and sometimes it's a big problem. Sometimes they have a really bad list.
So he's asking, do our clients come to us already with lists or a strategy surrounding their list and segmentation?
Well, and implying that we buy or rent lists for them.
No. So, but
Yeah, so we don't buy or rent lists, and sometimes we do when we work with a new client. We do get C lists that are really bad. You find that out really soon when you send the first few emails, and a lot of them are getting bounced or they're going to spam, or you get like a really bad spam score. So you have to work with them to find out how they're growing that list to begin with, because you don't want to send a message to 1 million people. You want to send your message to people that want to hear it. And if that's only 400 people, that's a better list than 1 million garbage email addresses.
Yeah. Don't buy or rent lists. It's not worth it. I've never seen it go well, and I've only seen people spend a lot of money only to hurt their reputation. So just ixnay. I've seen, I can't tell you how many times I've had somebody do that, and I've picked a random email address that's in the list and just typed it into Google, and it comes up in a whole bunch of spammer websites. So just, it's not worth it.
Robin?
Are you still friends with Toasties 26?
I am. Am I still friends with my friend Tanya? Yeah, she lives out in Yamhill. She's great.
Is she also a designer?
No. Nope. She's a mom.
Designing people.
Yeah.
And we have Beth.
Okay, so you're showing me the Apple Watch, and I kind of have a design and dev question. So how quickly do you start adjusting like your dev and your design to like these new platforms, and it doesn't make a big impact as far as like opens and everything, and how much more like level of effort is that, and because it's never going to stop. So if you just speak to that a little bit.
So the question is how, as in design and in development, do we learn and target about the Apple Watch, see who's opening it, and see how you need to change your message a little bit if you need to for the Apple Watch. When new technologies come out, generally what happens is the first few weeks of use, it's kind of just, let's see what we find out. And then there might be some good articles and resources about what the Apple Watch will support in email. So I'm not 100% sure yet, but I'm assuming it doesn't support images. The articles I've read estimate that it's going to have about 320 pixels to 380 pixels of resolution. But because the screen is so much smaller, that's not the same as like the pixels themselves are literally pixels. iPhone was 320 pixels wide, and so is the estimate for the Apple Watch. The Apple Watch is smaller, it has smaller pixels. So if it does have images, if it does have text, those things are going to be smaller. So what we're going to have to do is we're just going to have to send emails and see what they look like on an Apple Watch, and then kind of tweak the email more and more to see what you can get away with and what would you actually read on your watch. And maybe what happens is you are sending messages that don't really apply. Maybe, for example, I just saw a client email earlier, maybe someone doesn't want to buy a backpack on their Apple Watch. But, I mean, you still have to send that message, so how long is that email going to look like? You're not really sure, so we just kind of figure it out as when the things come out as we go. So like when the iPad mini came out, it rendered emails a little bit differently, but it didn't change it too much, so didn't have to make that many adjustments, but with the Apple Watch, you might have to.
Yeah, it seems like with something that small, we would have to adjust the design a lot. I remember after the keynote presentation, I was sitting over by our other developer, Heidi, and I was like, oh no, another breakpoint. We're gonna have to get even smaller. And so as soon as you hear something new, you're already starting to think about how that's gonna affect, and just sort of taking preparation and knowing that that's coming.
First headline, time is running out, Kohl's sale.
And then it's the watch is tied to your heart, so you can have them run to your nearest Kohl's, and if your heartbeat goes above 160, you get a 60% off something. I'm here all week. Any other questions or comments or hecklings?
Really electric typeface, is that custom?
It's a Google font, Montserrat, is that how you say it?
Oh, okay. There's Montserrat and
Montserrat.
then also Brooke Fonto, Sarah. Both Google open source fonts. Thanks.
Yeah.
And I saw a hand up, yeah.
Yeah, so you're talking about viewpoints and hardening breakpoints in email. Is that something that is completely okay by all email programs now to use?
So the question is, is it okay to target breakpoints in email, and kind of how would you go about doing that? So what's that? What's a breakpoint? Okay, sorry. What's a breakpoint? A breakpoint is how many pixels wide is your viewing screen before something happens. So an example is like a lot of websites. Let's say you have it open in Firefox or Chrome. You have it full width. So your resolution maybe is 1900 pixels wide. As you reduce the width of your viewing device, you don't want the things on the far right to stay off of the screen. So those things shrink as your window shrinks, so does the content, and it kind of snaps to fit. That's what we call adaptive or responsive design. So when you shrink something as to the size of what your phone could be, that's a breakpoint. And so generally like 480 pixels is a breakpoint, because that's when something goes from 500 to phone width. So for emails, there's a few clients, Yahoo and Gmail, that just don't let you go past 600. So we design and develop our emails as a 600 pixel width. And then for most phones, the lowest it'll go is usually 320. So that's kind of our break point. So you can use media queries, which in simple terms is if someone is viewing this on a device, how should we show the elements in this email? So we'll add classes and IDs, things that will target on the phone, so that if you're viewing something on a phone, it will either maybe it'll disappear, maybe it'll change the color of it. So we can hide things on phones in emails and websites. Yeah. So do you want to follow up?
So to follow up on that is, do you think this is kind of where it's going to go when we do different devices like the Apple Watch, for these second small devices?
Yeah. The follow-up was, is that where email kind of is going to go with breakpoints? And the first question we have to know is, will the Apple Watch even support media queries? Because if it doesn't, then we have no hope of targeting something. No hope of targeting something on the Apple Watch. We can't say, hide these images, hide this block of content if it's on an Apple Watch.
Or show us different content.
Or show us different, because the email doesn't tell us what they're viewing it on. We have to just deliver the message and hope the device will read it and interpret it correctly. So once we send the email, we just try to give it as much information as we can. So hopefully the Apple Watch will have something like a media query that will let us determine what it's viewing. Right now, we can't know if someone is viewing something on an Android versus an iPhone. All we can know is like if they support media stream, and if it's a certain DPI or a certain pixel width.
This subject kind of lends itself naturally to an event we're having on Friday. I encourage you, if you're interested in that, to come to that on Friday. It's going to be Death of the Design Comp, so it's sort of talking about, are there breakpoints, sort of designing for the mobile and sort of the future of design in that way.
Yeah, because you would prefer to design one message and just have everything take what they can from that message, instead of having to design a bunch of different layouts and comps for all of those different types of things. Any more questions?
Cool.
Thank you. I want to thank all of you for coming. I know some of you were here for Robin's tour trivia event earlier. We have 4 more events, one tomorrow, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Come to talk to us if you want to think about attending those. We still got some more beers and wines. We got some more snacks and donuts. And feel free to hang out and have a good time. Thank you.
Oh, yeah. So that one was a gift of how they do it. But don't let people leave you out. It's in New York in June. I guess before I said something. Yeah. Yeah.